My name is Seth Christensen. This is the Got Any Cows podcast. As Jonathan LaRue says, I may not know anything about anything else, but I do know a lot about cows.
You know cows.
So we're here for another episode of the Got Any Cows podcast. I've got my buddy Brett Stuart with me with Global AgriTrends. Brett, if you want to fill us in a little bit on your background, who you are, and why people should listen to what you have to say.
That's a tough claim. Well, I'm just a simple ranch boy from Woodruff, Utah. I grew up on a cattle ranch, ranching family, multi-generational. My entire plans and goals were to go home and ranch. I was planning to be a cowboy forever, and my dad compelled me against my will to go to college, and I ended up getting an accounting degree of all the crazy things to do in college. And I went home to the ranch, and I realized pretty quick it's a lot funner to ranch when you don't have an accounting degree. And right? And I was on a leased ranch, and my dad passed away young with cancer, and I did what anybody does with an accounting degree. I started building spreadsheets. And I started to analyze and say, I've got to buy this herd of cows, and I've got to buy this ranch. And pretty soon at the end of the spreadsheet, it basically said, you need to go find a job. So I just looked at the risk level, and I said, you know what? Okay. And so long story short, I did a stint with Ag Reserves Inc. in Salt Lake, auditing the LDS Church's cattle operations, financial operational audits, and some of their other for-profit businesses for a few years. I went to University of Nebraska and received an Ag MBA degree. There I worked in Florida, Oklahoma, managed cattle on feed, traded cattle. I worked for a branded beef company in Nebraska, and ended up in Denver working for the U.S. Meat Export Federation. Spent some years there, 10 years in Denver, worked for CattleFax in Denver doing analysis on the cattle markets, and 18 years ago started my own business, which is Global AgriTrends, and founded that with a partner in Denver just to provide better analysis, forecasting, research on the global agriculture markets, mainly protein-based, beef, pork, poultry, dairy, grains. And so for most of the last 20 years, I've just been traipsing the global cattle world, doing analysis and trying to anticipate and forecast global supply and demand.
You bet. Where all has that taken you, and who all do you work with?
For a small town kid from a town of 200 people, it's taken me all over the world, and I can assure you I have been lost in every major city and airport around the world. I don't know how many countries I've been to. I've never really sat down and counted. It's not millions, but it's probably in the 20s somewhere. I've traveled extensively to Asia. I would say my focus most of the last 20 years has been on Asia. But I've traveled to 6 continents, right? I've been to Africa, Europe, South America, Asia, multiple times. The country I've been to most would be Canada. I travel a lot to Canada. The country I've probably been to second most is probably China, Japan, Korea. But yeah, really just trying to keep a finger on the pulse of those markets. And so our business today, we advise companies all over the world on global agriculture conditions. Everything from economics, interest rates, foreign exchange rates, beef prices, cow herds, hog diseases, hog herds, poultry demand, changing demographics, changing populations, really trying to look and anticipate where are the next growth markets, who's losing self-sufficiency in food, who's gaining self-sufficiency, political winds, tariffs, trade barriers. It's really been a great adventure. For a ranch kid from a small town, it's been a great adventure, and I've been able to wander around and see Wagyu cattle on the rail in Tokyo auctioned off for $20,000 a head. I've eaten water buffalo in the Philippines. I've eaten, fill in the blanks. I've eaten a lot of parts and pieces of cows that most people haven't eaten, and I'm not sure they were even meant to be eaten. But it has been fun for a ranch kid. It's been a great adventure.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Brett and I got to know each other. It would be, 5-6 years ago, somewhere in there.
Yeah, probably.
Ended up living there in the same neighborhood and and part of the same church group, and got to know Brett in that capacity as a neighbor and friend at church. And there are you'll often hear, I guess, the advice quoted, or people say, surround yourself with people smarter than yourself. And so I pick Brett's brain on a regular basis. I'll tell Brett, hey, I want to sit down and let's go grab some tacos.
Yeah.
And that translates to, hey, I need another hour of free consulting, please.
That's very generous of you to say that, but yeah. Thank you.
Oh, absolutely. And that's
and it goes two ways, likewise.
No, I appreciate that. Yeah. And it's been really fun. I mean, I look at, for me, my background, is in both cattle and then I studied economics of all things. And like Brett mentioned, once you study economics, accounting, quite often it would steer you away from cattle. So there's not too many people that I can sit down and chat both cattle and econ with. Brett and I share, to live in the same place, have some of the same experiences, shared values, things like that. Brett, I count Brett as one of my good friends and feel lucky to do so. So, a lot of the people that I deal with on a day-to-day basis are going to be new to cattle. And are really, really good at what they do, very, very gifted businessmen and women in all sorts of different industries. But quite often cattle is something new, or it's something that their dad did it or their grandpa did it, or they've got roots in agriculture, but they're maybe a generation or two removed in a lot of cases, or at least have been off the farm since their childhood. And so a lot of these people will ask me, say, hey, Seth, what, to even try to get their heads wrapped around what do the markets look like historically, or what do cattle normally bring? Is there even a normal number for what these animals are worth? What are normal market conditions and or normal cycles? And then they'll try to get a peg on where are we at today and where are we at going forward for cattle markets. And so if you could, Brett, maybe kind of give us from your perspective, given the cattle markets and protein markets, this is what you do all day, every day. If you were going to present it to somebody that absolutely is intelligent, but maybe is brand new to cattle, what's a normal cattle environment look like if you look over the past 5-10 years relative to where we're at today for cattle as a commodity?
Boy, that's a big topic, Seth. You look at cattle, the cattle world is incredibly complicated. Because we talk about cattle, it's not just cattle, it's beef. And it's not just beef, it's ribeyes in steakhouses in New York and it's omasum in China, right? Yeah. So you look at cattle, just even a bovine animal, right? I think this is the only mammal that can exist and survive in every climate zone on Earth, are cows. And they're pretty much found in every climate zone on Earth. Yeah. They're incredible animals, right? They're just incredible. But to try to go through the business of raising cattle, it is enormously complicated, and I think underestimated how complex it is. Not only complex, it's incredibly diverse. So I look at cattle operations in Florida versus cattle operations in Idaho. Night and day different. The financials are different, the grazing's different, the genetics are different, the calving system's different, the beef product is different. Right. We have just so much diversity, and I don't know of any other product on earth that even comes close to the diversity and complexity as cattle. We look at cows out in the pasture and go, okay, there's some cows grazing. You sell calves, right? I grew up as a kid, put calves on the semi, send them east, make more calves, put them on the semi, yes. Send them east, right? Then I went east and I started trading cattle and managing cattle on feed and seeing how that feed yard system works. Mm-hmm. And then I worked for the Export Federation and I went through packing plants. There is nothing more complex on this earth in terms of manufacturing as a beef packing plant. And it's not an assembly plant, it's a disassembly plant. And so you start with one SKU and you end up with hundreds of SKUs. Right. But you think of, say you have a shop making computer chips or making cars or whatever. That doesn't hold a candle to the complexity of a small cow kill plant in Idaho. Mm-hmm. You've got 3 different levels of government inspectors. You've got the bio side, the live side, the pathogen side, the meat side, temperature control, climate control, labor, and it's not automated. It requires human beings to do this. And then that excludes even the idea of marketing. You're marketing hundreds and hundreds of SKUs. You're not just selling hamburger and steaks to the grocery guys. Right. You're selling omasum and offal and in some places fetal blood serum and, fill in the blank. It's unbelievable how this works. And so that's why I say, just to kind of set the stage, it is incredibly complex. Now, if we look at the ranch level, and say, okay, what's a normal cycle, or what do things look like? If I look at, well, let me say one more thing. The other thing that's complicated is to look at things on a U.S. average, right? There is
Right.
a U.S. average
Right.
does nothing for anyone.
Right.
And I've spent my lifetime analyzing cost of production and where's the best place to run cows, and trying to standardize that. But you have to have some baseline, right?
Right.
So we have an average calf price. You look and say, what's an average 550-pound calf price? Well, that excludes probably 90% of cattle in the US.
Right.
That average does, because the tails are so long on the
Yes.
curve.
Yep.
But if you look at let's just say profitability, from 1980 to 2000, which were the 20 years I was involved in cattle, the average cow-calf margin was probably $60, $70 a head. And I say margin, I'm talking cash margin. That's cash return, excluding return to land, excluding return to ownership, just your cash-to-cash margin, which is really the only way you can look at it, because land complicates everything. So if you look at that cash-to-cash margin, so the years I was running cattle, making decisions, 60, 70, 80 bucks a head average. Bad year was minus 40, plus year was, or a good year was 120, wherever. We look at that today, that cash margin this year is going to be over $600.
Yeah.
And the last 8 years have averaged over $400 to $500. And so you say, what's normal? What we've been through, this is not normal,
Yeah. Yep.
right? If we want to look back through time, where we're at today is not normal. Now, the question becomes, is it a new normal? And some people will say it's a new normal and this is how things are going to be. And there's something to be said for that. This inflationary environment, the increase of the U.S. money supply. Through COVID, we increased the U.S. money supply 40%. And so, sure, your trucks are going to cost a lot of money, and your labor's going up, and insurance and gas and diesel, and everything you buy is going to cost a lot more. Now, the good news is the average price of retail beef in the store is 30% higher than it was pre-COVID. And so that inflation floats all boats, but we are in a new normal from that standpoint. As far as profitability, the cow herd cycles, and it's very predictable. I built a chart the other day. I went back to 1920, and I charted that cow herd, and it increases over time, and then it decreases over time. But if you zoom in, it always cycles.
Yes.
And it's very predictable. It's one of the most predictable commodity trends I've seen.
Yes.
In all commodities is the U.S. cattle cycle, and it's 8 to 11 years, peak to trough. It's based on the biology of a cow and market behavior. And every cattle cycle I've been through in my professional life, there's always a pretty loud voice in the corner saying, it's different this time, right?
Yep.
It's different this time.
Right.
And my response to that is twofold. One, commodity markets are like airplanes. We haven't left one up there yet, right? Everything cycles, and I don't care what business you're in. Every market cycles. And so prices cycle and inventory cycles. And so the second thing I would say is that is a very predictable cycle. And this time might be a little different in some ways, but we're not going to break this and say we're not going to have cattle cycles anymore. We're going to have cycles. And so, so the normal is cyclical. This is cyclical in nature, and there's some years that you're saying, good grief, why am I doing this? And then 6-8 years later, you're going, boy, I'm a genius, right?
Right. Yep. So looking at right now, I mean, relative to, how far back would be the last trough or the last low point in the market? If you're going back the last 10, 20 years, what's the lowest point and what's the highest point and what caused those? If you're looking at that longer term trend like you're talking.
So let's talk about that cattle cycle. So 2014-15 was the last price high.
Right.
The price high correlates usually with the inventory low, the cow herd low. So the cow herd gets tight, the prices go high. So 14-15, those prices go really high. And what do producers do?
Make more,
right? The market is telling you. Markets are very efficient. Make more calves. And we did. And within 3 or 4 years, we jumped that cow herd up 6-8%. And so the cow herd goes up. But the way we grow that herd, and let's look forward. Let's start here at 2024. So if I say, boy, I made good money this year, I need more cows, I'm going to hold some heifer calves in 2024 to breed in 2025, to calve in 2026, to make more beef in 2027.
Yes.
So I start pulling those heifers out of the mix. There's fewer heifers to get slaughtered this year, the next year, and the next year.
Yep.
And this supply tightens through 24, 25, 26. And then in 27, we start to get more beef. But for 3 years, we've been telling guys to retain heifers. And so not only do we get enough beef, we get too much beef.
Yep.
And so 27, 28, 29, we start going, whoa, 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 shut it down. The prices are down.
Right.
And then when that price gets bad, pretty soon you're going, oh, I got to sell my steers and my heifers to make my payment now, right? Because the price is lower.
Right.
So then we start liquidating heifers and cows. When the market's saying we don't need more beef, what do? We give them more beef. And so that exaggerates that cycle. And so the inventory gets big and the prices come down and we start that cycle over again. And one other thing is drought helps that. And it's interesting, a lot of those cattle cycles were spurred deeper with a drought.
Right.
And that's what we've had here. The last 4 years, you can look at the last 4 years of drought monitors in the U.S., and it started in the northern plains, it centered down in Texas. Pretty much everywhere over the last 4 years has had a pretty good drought. Texas liquidated 500,000 beef cows the last 6 years, or 5 years. And so that's what drought does. So we had a cycle plus drought, but this is a pretty textbook cattle cycle.
Yeah. Yep. So if we're looking at, historically relative to the last 10 years, we're high, or I should say we're at least as high or higher as we have been ever since that last peak in 2014, 2015. Sure. Have we gone a ways past that, or are we kind of right on par with it?
No, we're in profitability and prices, we're well beyond what that 14, 15, and that was a pretty shocking price spike, and it happened quickly. But this price cycle we're in now is incredible. And I guess incredible. It was a lot better back in, say, July. You look at those calves that were video sold in July for fall delivery. I know of some 480-pound calves that brought $4 a pound, right? $1,800 a calf.
Yeah.
Those calves came off the ranch that I was running. That in 1999, really? I sold those same calves for 96 cents a pound.
Well, and I would say, correct me if I'm wrong here, but spitballing from a non-professional market analyst position, I'd say a lot of years you can get that 5-weight calf for $1.50. It has been a fairly normal, number. Aside from things like that peak in 2014, 2015, and this peak now that's then exceeded it. So things are really at all-time highs overall as far as market speaking, value right now. And we're getting down towards the lowest cattle inventory since, what's the year, 1951 or 60 something. Somewhere right in there. It's been a long time since the cow herd's been this small, and the price is extremely high. So given that that's the setting we're currently in, that we're at historic highs right now, what would you say are the challenges and opportunities specifically for someone that maybe has a small set of cows? So there's going to be some challenges inherent to the fact that they are small. We're not even necessarily sending pot loads in some cases. You're dealing with the issues of, we're running small sets through the sale barn, we're running small sets through cow buyers, or different issues like under that. Given today's market setting being at historic highs, what would you say are challenges and opportunities for someone in that setting, a small cow-calf operator?
Yeah, well, what's hard, Seth, is you look and go, this is a very predictable cycle, but it's very hard to play. Yeah. So you say, okay, cows are worth a lot, so let's say next year I'm going to liquidate my whole herd, sell everything while it's really high, and then I'll buy back when it's cheap. Well, you might be out for 4 years, right? So I'm going to go sell my cows. I'm going to pay a massive capital gains tax on it. Yep. Genetics that I've worked on and built and like, and then I'm going to sit there and twiddle my thumbs for 4 years and say, okay, now it's the bottom, I'm going to buy back in. It's very hard to play that game. So really, in the cattle business, you're just in the business, right? And so you kind of take the good with the bad. When prices are high like this, the market is saying make more cows, make more beef. And so what you do, I think the best investment you can make to try to ride this cycle is invest in your productivity. You do not want open cows. Open cows you never want open cows, right? And when they're really cheap, you don't want open cows either. But right now, man, you have money to invest in productivity. So the market's saying be productive. You need to build a little barn to calve in to get your cattle out of the winter so you don't lose 10% of your calves. Build a little barn, right? That's what the market's saying is, here's some money, invest in genetics, in repro, in vaccine, whatever it takes. You want to get your cows in the best condition. You want every one of them bred. You want to make calves and get as tight a ship as you can. And the market's giving you money to invest in that.
Right.
And those are good investments that a lot of those carry you through the down cycle. You have that calving barn now, you have the facilities. And so, yeah, that's an opportunity right now as the market's paying you. I say get more efficient. You can't do a lot on stocking rate. It's not like you can go fist fight your neighbor for overpriced land right now, but I'm not sure that's the right answer either.
Right.
It's hard to really ebb and flow a cow herd, but you can really try to fine tune and get productive.
Yeah.
So I would say that's the opportunity here.
Yeah.
What are the risks, threats? I don't really know. From a ranch standpoint, you're in a good spot. You're going to make money even when you're wrong. The next 2 or 3 years, you're going to make money. It's going to work. But I think another thing you got to think about is this thing cycles.
Yes.
And what about 6 and 7 years out?
Yes.
And I know every rancher's mentality on December 31st is to say, I can buy a truck at 20% off right now.
Right.
Because if I don't buy this truck today, then it's a taxable deduction. And tomorrow I'm paying tax on that. And so I would guess this year, December 31st, there's going to be people buying horse trailers and trucks and horses. Be careful with that, right? Be wise in that, because sometimes it's okay to pay a little tax and put some money in the bank. And I'm not a tax guy. I'm not giving you tax advice, but I'm saying the tragedy of our tax law is and you can look at it in the crop cycles with corn. We have high-priced corn. Farmers make lots of money. They all buy new harvesters. They pay a lot for land. And then the price goes down and they say we can't survive at these levels and we liquidate. And over 20 years, I've seen that price of corn triple. 20 years, the break-even cost of corn, right? Almost tripled to where $2 used to make everybody money, then $3 used to make everyone money, and now $4, we can't make money on $4. And it's because of tax law. We reinvest instead of... So, yeah, be careful with that. Look for ways to put a little reserve away for a rainy day.
Yeah. No, I think that's super sound advice, because like you mentioned, it's so predictable if you look at it as a long-term deal. Now, there's times that it'll ebb and it'll flow and it'll move quickly. And, I mean, it's the same in the cattle markets as in any market. There's always going to be a day trader somewhere that says, oh, man, you need to grab this contract or sell that contract, or you got to move stuff fast, quick. And there's a space for that. And then there's nothing against people that do it that way. But if you're looking at the long-term reality of cattle, like you mentioned, the replacement cycle is extremely slow. If I decide to hold the heifer this year, it's a long time before she's a productive cow. From the time I hold a heifer to breed a heifer to calve a heifer to have something she's producing, it's a slow, long cycle. So I think given that cattle, due to their very nature, are a long-term play, plain and simple. There's not ways to quickly adjust supply.
Jump in, jump out.
There's not really an option. And especially, in the world we work in with genetics, it's very definitely a long-term play, because cow A is not necessarily equal to cow B, and looking at genetics and making any significant genetic change is very definitely a long-term approach. And it takes a long time to revolve generations and to make significant genetic change. So given that we're looking at it from a long-term perspective, almost by default, or due to the physiology of cows, and we know that we're at all-time highs, and we know that those lows will come back. Like you mentioned, the airplane isn't going to stay floating. It will come back down given time. I think that's a really sound approach to say, hey, we need to invest in productivity and efficiency, but not leverage ourselves to the hilt, banking on calves being at $4 for the rest of forever, when they've more consistently been more like $1.50. Hey guys, this is Seth Christensen with the Got Any Cows podcast. I wanted to give you guys a personal invitation to check out our website. That's gotanycows.com. Gotanycows.com is going to take you to the Christensen Genetics website. On that website, we've got a couple of different things that I would like you to take advantage of. One of the first tabs that you'll see there across the top on the Christensen Genetics website is the podcast tab. You can find any and all of the episodes that have been released there, along with full video. The next tab over would be the Learn tab. The point of everything on this tab would be to help educate somebody that maybe doesn't have cattle yet, help you prepare to be ready to own your own cows. We help people on a regular basis establish new herds, build a quality set of cattle. The Learn tab is all about being ready for cattle ownership. The next tab that you'll see on the top of the website there is the Build Your Herd tab. This is going to have our current sale inventory on it. It'll have everything from semen and embryos to females, bulls, all of the above. It's all there. There's going to be pictures there. There's going to be registration links there. There's going to be pricing there. All of the live animals on christensengenetics.com come with free delivery anywhere in the continental United States included. So if you decide to purchase any of these animals, all you have to do is click the click to buy button that is included on each of those listings. That'll send an email to us. We'll send an invoice to you. Once you pay that invoice, we'll go ahead and schedule a brand inspection, a health inspection, and shipment to your ranch. And then after that, the next tab is the Run Your Ranch tab. So this would be where you can find information on what to do when you receive those animals, vaccination protocols, nutrition recommendations, calving recommendations, shipping, marketing, anything that you might need to do once you own the cattle. So the whole point of this website at large of gotanycows.com is meant to help you prepare to own cows, purchase the best cows you can possibly get, and then know what to do with them. So I'd invite you guys to take advantage of that resource. We built it for you. It's there to use. Please go ahead and visit gotanycows.com. Be sure to subscribe at the bottom of the page and you'll receive updates as things are added to the site. Again, that's gotanycows.com, and we'll see you there. Not that we really had a script, but I'll put you on the spot here just with a question I'd thought of, but that I had not mentioned ahead of time. Looking again at small operators or people that are maybe outside of the commodity markets, aren't necessarily trading beef as a commodity or trading it by the semi-load or really even by the pound. Maybe we're looking at by the head markets, in these seed stock type markets. What do you see as maybe some opportunities and threats, this direct to market phenomenon that has taken advantage or that has shown up, especially since COVID, with people selling a lot of beef direct to consumer. And I think there's been some people that have done really, really well with that. There's been people that have struggled with that. As with anything, it's ebbed and flowed. It has changed during COVID and since COVID per se. What do you see on that end of things? If someone has a small enough herd that they're considering selling finished product as opposed to selling calves into a larger commodity marketplace, what do you see for those guys just shooting from the hip as far as opportunities there and or things to be aware of, I guess, threats to people that choose to go that route and functionally avoid this complicated, complex, lots of moving parts, very large scale commodity beef marketplace?
Yeah, that's interesting. And it has been a phenomenon really since COVID. And I don't know if it was just that COVID scared some people about food supply or what. But it's been kind of fun to watch. It's been neat to see and to see these small plants pop up and, it's tough, right? My thoughts are when prices are high, things are good. You don't have as much wiggle room with premiums, right? When prices are good, people just want beef. When prices are low, that's when you really start to say, hey, this is a big advantage. I don't think it's a bad thing to be doing it now. I think there's some real opportunity. What you realize through all of this is how much that retail margin is. Retail margin on beef is huge, right? And so what we're talking about here, we're talking about competing with the retailer. And so it didn't take a lot of math to realize, okay, this $1,800 calf right now that a few years ago might have been $1,200 calf or $1,000 calf, at the retail value, it's like $6,000. Now, the difference between that calf and the steak is 80 bushels of corn, 2 years, trimmed, cut, boxed, inspected, moved, frozen, placed, marketed. And so you say, oh, that's a pretty good margin if you're willing to jump through the hoops. And for a guy that just loves to be out riding his horse punching cows, you're probably not going to enjoy that. But if you enjoy the idea of tracing that beef through and seeing how it works, and you like networking and talking to people and social media, man, there's people that have just found a wonderful niche there. And I think it's a good niche. The challenge is, and I remember I worked for a branded beef program in Nebraska 20 years ago. The challenge with a branded beef program, you sit there and go, I raise good calves, and they're good beef, and they might even be specialty calves. And specialty beef, Wagyu, Akiyushi, those kind of things. People will pay for this stuff, right? And people say, ooh, we'd love that. We want to buy it. Now, what you got to remember is you usually calve once a year. you usually wean once a year. People eat beef 12 months of the year.
Yeah.
So
Yes.
so if you want to go to a small-scale restaurant or a small-scale retailer and say, hey, I want to provide your beef, they'll say, okay, we need this much every month of the year.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So year-round supply is tricky.
Yeah.
Now, if you're just marketing beef a few at a time and say, hey, I'll pre-sale, and when they're ready, I'll call you, come get them.
Yep.
You take that equation out, right? Makes it way easy.
Yep.
And there's people doing a phenomenal job of that.
Right.
It's shocking to me how well that's working.
Yeah.
And you may sit and run your math and go, oh, I'm not making as much as I thought over the market, over commodity.
Right.
But wait 4 or 5 years. On the other side of the cycle, that's where you really get the juice from that.
Mm-hmm.
So year-round supply is tough. The other thing you got to realize is everyone wants your steaks.
Yeah. Yep.
Everyone wants the middle meats. Middle meats are 12% of your carcass.
Yeah.
So 88% of your carcass is not steaks.
Right.
And you got to get a premium on that. If you're paying a small plant to kill, you got to realize those 6,000 head a day packing plants, their cost to kill, cut, and box a steer is way less than what you're going to pay at the guy that does 20 head a day.
Right.
And so to capture that, you've got to find premium for your grind.
Yep.
And you've got to have, and there's a lot of grind out there, and I think there's some opportunities there. You can sell halves and quarters, and that gets you around it, or full sets, you know.
Yep.
But if you're just going to say, I'm going to cut and box and sell the best meat in the world, what you're going to find, it's like when I was a kid. We would go get a steer butchered, usually a broken-legged steer. We'd put them in the corral, feed them for 3 months, and go butcher them, put them in the freezer. And by spring, we were all digging through round steak to find a steak in the bottom, right?
Yeah.
Round steak and hamburger was all what was left in the freezer.
Right.
And so you got to think about how to market every cut, get a premium for every cut, year-round supply, and you've got to have a way to get them dead and in a box.
Right.
And it is not cheap, and it's not easy, because at the end of the day, that's somebody with a knife, right?
Right.
And nobody wants to do that. And so it is going to be a cost. If you have a good packer partner that can fabricate, it's not going to be me out in my backyard with a knife, right?
Right. Right.
So there is a cost. Those are, I think, the 3 kickers that get you there.
Yeah.
Year-round supply, cut utilization, and getting them dead and in a box.
Yeah.
But there's never been a better time than right now to do it.
Right. Right.
It's a great time.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. And that's one of the things that I look at right now, you know, as we're talking through, you know, maybe the opportunities or threats of being at historic highs as far as values of beef cattle. I look at it today, and I'm sitting here right alongside people as far as, you know, I've got cows. How do I best make a return on them? And I think one of the opportunities is, especially when it comes to cutting off the bottom end, or you talked about adding efficiency or adding productivity and trimming out those less productive animals. They are worth a pile right now. I mean, it is unreal. Sending animals that are, I mean, for all intents and purposes, don't really have another use. You know what I mean? They're kind of the end of their productive life, or it's a bull that's broken a leg, or it's a cow that's come up open, or whatever else it is. I mean, we've had several of those animals on a per head basis once they're sent to the kill plant to CS Beef here locally. I mean, 2,000 to 2,500 a head. You know, for kill animals that we've put no marketing in. I've not packaged them. I've not sold them a piece at a time as a finished product. I mean, that's just sending them straight to the plant, you know, and selling them as a commodity. And so I think there's an opportunity in that sense to say, hey, we're going to trim the fat per se, meaning we're going to get rid of these less productive animals. We're going to get paid a pretty penny for them, and then we're going to reinvest that capital into things that'll be there for us to improve productivity or efficiency, like you mentioned, when things cycle back down. We're going to make sure we have the best genetics. We're going to make sure we have facilities that make sense and equipment that makes sense. You know, not that we leverage into them so hard that we're in a bind when things go down, but that they're paid for and they're ready as things cycle back in the other direction. And I think, you know, if you get set up and ready, so for example, if I can get rid of, you know, these unproductive animals for a pile and then reinvest it into things like Akiushi genetics or whatever else it may be, it's the right fit for an individual, but that allows me to market a premium product when that thing does go back down. So say it takes me a couple, 2-3 years to get online with a finished beef product. But especially for someone that maybe is in another business or has an established business network, but not necessarily an established cattle background, it may be as easy or easier for that person to sell beef as what it would be to try to understand commodity markets, or how do I hedge my calves, or how do I get a semi-load together when I only have 20 cows, et cetera. Right. If we say, hey, look, we're gonna go ahead and clean up all these extra cows that maybe were a mistake yesterday or have become unproductive, and we're going to use that capital and invest in the genetics and equipment so that by the time the thing cycles back down, now we're selling beef by the cut, you know, to to people that are going to pay a premium for that finished product,
Yeah.
and marketing it that way, rather than selling live animals. So looking forward, we've talked about I guess where the market's been, where the market's at. If you're looking forward as far as where the market's going, we've talked about long term, it kind of cycles back down. But how long term? I mean, obviously, this is the crystal ball question.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone and their dog wants a day and a time.
Right.
Where can I lock the very highest price, or at what point in time do I need to be out before it starts coming off? In your crystal ball, what would you say as far as projections going forward?
Yeah, that's the tough question, right? We're in a little bit of limbo right now, and it's just kind of a weird feeling of kind of wait and see. Typically, what changes a cattle cycle? You go from liquidation to restocking, and that's what we're watching for now. When does the restocking begin?
Right.
And there's a few indicators you can watch, but historically, when people make money, when there's good profits there, and when there's green grass and cheap hay, that usually says restocking.
Right.
And so sitting here in Idaho, I look around and go, there's a lot of cheap hay and there's some green grass and some yellow grass, but there is some grass. We've had a pretty
Some
good
weeds
year.
down here.
We've had a pretty good year. So there's grass and there's hay and there's good profits. That would say we're going to restock. I would say be a little cautious about that. I'm not sure we're there quite yet. And I've seen a couple cycles happen where even when the signal said to restock, it was like a year before we did, which is kind of weird to watch. And that's what I say, we're in a little bit of limbo. Australia did that in their last cycle a couple of years ago. Yeah. They got rain and everything was great, and they liquidated for another year because the prices were so high. Yeah. This cow price being high does not bode well for, I want to hold cows or hold calves. Right. So a couple of the indicators you look at are female as a percent of the total kill. The percent of the total cattle, calves, fed cattle, everything being killed, the percent that's female. When that drops down below 47% and starts diving down, that tells you we're restocking. We're not there yet. June, well, the most recent data, June was showing about 48%. I'm not sure we're there yet. The other indicator we'll see in December, we get a cattle on feed report that's a quarterly report that shows the percent of cattle placements that are female. They only do that quarterly. Okay. December will be the next one. Gotcha. So in December, we'll be able to say, okay, of the cattle placed on feed, what percent were female? That's a pretty good indicator. But I think it's going to be a slow rebuild. I think we're in for another tight year. Prices are high. There's still some guys going, this is maybe the golden ticket to sell my cows and be done. There's the average age of ranchers in the U.S. just keeps creeping up. And
what's the latest number? Do you know off the top of your head out of window how old they've gotten?
I've seen the average farmer age at like 59 or something.
Yeah, it seems like it's high 50s or low 60s.
I saw a number years ago in Wyoming, and it was of ranchers in Wyoming. I'm not sure. I can't remember what it was. This was years ago, but it was something like 66 or something. Yeah. And the joke was that the 80-year-olds are all exiting the business and selling to the 70-year-olds, right? Or the 60-year-olds.
That's about right, yeah. Yep, exactly.
But it's such a lifestyle industry that it's really slow to change, and I'm not sure that matters as much as we think it does, because I've seen that happening now for 40 years, 30 years, and we continue to adapt and adjust, and a few young guys get in and go into debt, and away they go, and it moves forward. But, it's interesting to watch. But I think I think we will probably not see true rebuild until maybe a year from now. Which means next year's going to be tight supplies. We've watched the cattle on feed. We just continue to place cattle on feed, and every voice, everything has been saying cattle on feed's going to fall, and it hasn't. So you look at the live cattle futures market, which is what the contract you can trade out in the future on live cattle. Today's spot cash price is $1.84 probably on fed cattle. The curve of that going out in the future is negative. It's suggesting fed cattle next year are going to be cheaper than this year. We just took 10% of the cow herd out. That's a crazy situation, and you can say, wow, what an opportunity. Let's all go buy the live cattle futures. There's a voice echoing in my head that says cattle futures can remain irrational longer than you can remain liquid.
Yeah.
And there's some irrationality in
Yeah.
that. So be cautious about that.
Right.
But I think at some point there is an opportunity, because that's a very odd negative curve on live cattle futures.
Yep.
It's hard to believe, next June we're going to be at 170 fed cattle.
Right.
That's,
right. Yeah. Why would it go down? As far as that, there's no fundamentals in place.
No, but that market's traded on, there's a lot of outside money and Wall Street money and funds and fear and uncertainty drive that down.
Correct.
But I think, as far as calves, I would say 2025 calf prices are going to be higher than 2024.
Yep.
And 2026 are going to be right around that same price.
Yep.
Potential for higher. We'll see what weather does.
Right.
But if it looks like, we had a moderate La Nina pattern, which suggests a little dry, but that's fading.
Mm-hmm.
Looks like we're going to have kind of a normal weather year, which bodes well for the cattle world. And so I would say probably your peak in calf prices will be 2025, maybe 2026. But even once we start rebuilding then it even gets tighter, right? So I think we have good cattle prices, good calf prices, good margins right out through 26, 27, and then we start to turn the corner. And so there's a real opportunity here to say, okay, guys, put some money away. And you say, do I go keep all my heifer calves and breed them?
Right.
That's a tough call, right?
Yeah.
Because then you're right in that cycle. They're going to be ready about the time the market's oversupplied. And so you may say, okay, these heifer calves, do I sell 2 of them and go buy 1 bred heifer right now that's going to get me a year earlier on this cycle?
Yeah.
And I know there's some crazy bred heifer prices, but you want to get as quick into this cycle as you can. Or can I do something genetically with some embryos or something and speed this thing up? Because I don't want to wait 3 years for a calf.
Yep. And I think, a lot of times when we talk about these peaks and then these valleys, the highs and the lows, by the time you're already in it, in a lot of cases, you're too late. If we're trying to capitalize on the high, we needed to be building supply 3 years ago.
Right.
And conversely, if we're trying to prepare for the low, I think that's the real opportunity. And I think that's a key takeaway from your take on the market scenario, is looking at it with a long-term lens and saying, hey, it's not just exactly when's it going to peak, or exactly what day is it going to be highest, or what's the short-term motion, and where do things go. It's looking at this is the opportunity to prepare for when does it go back down. It's not all just about positioning for today. It's about positioning for 3 years out, and being ready for when it does cycle back down, and making best use of the fact that cattle are going to sell for a pile right now. And right now, today, it isn't hardly going to matter what they are. They're all going to be worth a pile. A lot of premiums have dried up for all sorts of different programs, whether that's genetics programs, vaccination programs, health programs, all natural programs. A lot of premiums have functionally evaporated because today anything with a pulse is worth gold, But it's not about looking at just today. Today, really, the decisions we're making right now, it's about what are we going to have to sell in 2, 3, or 4 years. And I think it's about positioning. Am I getting positioned to sell beef in 2, 3, or 4 years? Or am I getting positioned to sell calves? Or am I getting positioned to sell heifers, females, replacements, things like that? And I think that's kind of a question that people need to take that long-term stance in cattle and take a look at, what do I want to sell? What is my production scenario set up for? What's my skill set up for? What do I want to sell? And then realize that it is going to take you 3 or 4 years to really, truly have something ready to sell. And so being positioned now to be ready for the downside is, anyway, kind of a unique take on it. I think it's not just about it's high today. It's about it will cycle back the other direction given time. So being ready for that as it comes, I think, is a sound take. Is there anything else, Brett, in particular that you would say if you're talking to somebody that's maybe a newer, small cow-calf operator? Any other comments that you would throw their way, or bits of advice, or thoughts?
Well, I guess the thought I'd have is to just take a look, and we always start with why, right? Why am I in the cattle business? What's your commitment level? Why are you in it? Are you passionate about it? Are you here for the long term? Do you want to really make a go of this? Are you willing to invest? Are you willing to take the good years and bad years? I think it's a phenomenal time. I don't think there's ever been a time where the opportunities and the outlook are greater than right now. And I say that, I'm fully aware of the alt meat agenda, of the veganism, of the regulation, of the climate policy, of fill in the blank. I weigh all of that stuff on the scale every day. And what's interesting right here, Seth, in 20 years, I've never seen this scenario. Brazil, U.S., Australia, Argentina, Uruguay, every cow herd has been liquidating in sync the last 3 years. It's shocking, right? I mean, things ebb and flow. And so next year, the global cow herd is going to be tight. And so we have the outsized effect from the international markets. China came out of nowhere 5 years ago and became the biggest beef importer in the world. It's insatiable. Even with a poor economy, they're going to import record high amounts of beef this year. The average price of U.S. beef to China in June was the highest ever. So even with a weak economy, China's out there, Japan's out there. It's a hungry world. If I look at, when I talked about the diversity of cows, if you look at grain-fed, white-fat beef, what we just love in America and what they love all over the world, I don't care if it's a third world country, every country has a high-end hotel. And every high-end hotel wants white-fat beef.
Yes.
And in China, over the last 5 years, it's been shocking to see every restaurant has a picture of white-fat beef. Now, why that's funny is white-fat beef is only produced U.S., Canada, about a third of Australia, and of course the Japanese Wagyu.
Right.
South America produces very little, if any, what we would call choice prime white-fat beef. And so we have a product that's sought all over the world. They love it, they want it, they promote it, they pretend like they have it in China, right? And we've got it. Right? And we've got it. And global demand is incredible. I mean, we see some populations leveling off in fertility rates. You look at the world population, we're still adding 70 million people a year to the planet. In the next 10 years, we will add 25 trillion in global GDP.
That's staggering.
What's the cow herd going to be 10 years from now? We'll be lucky to be the same size we are now globally. So I ran the math, and if I just look at grain-fed beef, if I exclude Indian water buffalo and South American grass-fed, and just look at grass-fed beef, in 2025, we will have less grain-fed beef available for the world than we did in 2020. And during that time, I don't know how many trillion dollars, 20, 30 trillion dollars, 70 million people a year. I mean, what, a billion plus more people. And we'll have less grain-fed beef on this planet next year than we had 20 years ago. Now look out 10 years, you look at the 10-year production forecasts and you go, we are slowing down the production of protein on this earth. For the last, 15, 20 years, we've averaged about 4.5 million tons of beef, pork, and poultry a year. The 10-year projections show 3 million tons coming out next year. So we're kind of at a hinge point where protein production's been going like this and it's going to go like this. And we're in the business of producing truly some of the greatest beef on earth.
Yes.
That the most expensive incomes on earth are chasing.
Yes. I think one of the neatest things about a cow is that 70% of the earth's landmass you can't grow crops on.
Exactly, right.
But you can stick a cow on it.
That's right.
And I think, if somebody came out tomorrow and said, hey, we've created this fantastic, little autonomous robot that's solar powered and it only eats grass, it dumps out fertilizer, and it'll give you a steak on occasion. You'd be like, oh my word, like, wow, sign me up for that little, and that's a cow.
It's self-replicating and can survive in any environment.
Right. It's
Silicon Valley would be like, write checks all day, right?
Huge deal.
It's regenerative.
It's regenerative. That's exactly right.
It produces plant-based protein.
It's renewable, and literally solar powered.
Yeah.
And you can do it anywhere. You don't need power lines there. You don't need anything.
No, very little maintenance.
That's exactly right.
But
so what they can do is just incredible, I think.
Can escape through virtually any fence you've ever made.
Edit that part out.
They're incredible.
Right.
If there's a bucket they can get their head stuck in, they'll probably do that too.
Cows don't ever cause any problems. Right. Definitely were not
Easiest
out
thing
at dusk last night. That definitely didn't happen.
Yeah. Cows on the highway never happens.
We've never been there. We've never been there. But no, spoken like a true cattleman, and I appreciate the insight there and the perspective you bring to the table. I think there'd be very few people you could find that are going to have a broader perspective on international protein markets than what you do through your work with Global AgriTrends there. I don't know why I struggle to say that, but Global AgriTrends.
It's a mouthful.
I
just call it AgriTrends anymore. I just slowed it down.
What is the website? If somebody wants to get a hold of your content or subscribe to the service that you provide there, Brett, how do they find you and the service you provide?
AgriTrends.com.
AgriTrends.com.
AGRI, AgriTrends.com.
AgriTrends.com.
Yeah, if you have any interest in it, shoot me an email. We'll send you a newsletter, put you on a free trial.
Awesome.
Happy to do it. But
Awesome. And if there's anyone that could provide you value as it comes to tracking protein markets, it would be my friend Brett Stewart. I sure appreciate you coming and chatting.
you.
This has been another episode of the Got Any Cows podcast. I'm Seth Christensen here with Brett Stewart today, and appreciate you being here with me, my friend.
Thank you, Seth. Appreciate it.
Take care, buddy.
Yep.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Got Any Cows podcast. Be sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts, and visit us anytime at gotanycows.com.